Nobody was supposed to see that moment. Not the cameras, not the internet, and definitely not millions of people replaying it frame by frame, analyzing every look, every movement, every second. But somehow it leaked. And now everyone is asking the same question. What really happened when T.I. walked into that detention center to face his son? Because this isn't just another viral clip. This feels different, heavier. We're talking about a father who's lived that life, who knows exactly what those walls mean, what those handcuffs feel like, walking into a room where his own son, King Harris, is sitting on the other side. And according to people who claim they've seen the footage, this wasn't calm. This wasn't quiet. This wasn't some soft, reassuring conversation. It was intense. Some say it got heated. Not loud for the sake of noise, but heavy, emotional, real. The kind of moment where the tension says more than words ever could. Because sometimes it's not what's said. It's how it's said. The body language, the eye contact, the silence between sentences, the way a father looks at his son when he realizes something might be slipping out of his control. And that's what made this moment hit so hard. Because it didn't come out of nowhere. It came right after one of the most embarrassing, most viral moments of King Harris's life. An arrest that already had the internet questioning everything. But this changed the narrative. Because suddenly, this isn't just about a young celebrity getting into trouble. This is about something deeper. A father watching history repeat itself and realizing he might not be able to stop it. But here's the part nobody can answer. What exactly was said in that room? What did T.I. tell his son when there were no cameras meant to be watching? And why are people saying that moment, that conversation, might be the real turning point in King Harris's life? Because what happened inside that detention center? It wasn't just viral. It was uncomfortable, emotional, and it might explain everything that's been building up to this point. To really understand why this moment hit the way it did, you have to go back. Because this wasn't just a random visit. This wasn't just a father checking in. This was a moment years in the making. King Harris's story didn't start with this arrest. And it definitely didn't start with that Pikachu onesie going viral. This goes way deeper than that. Because growing up as the son of T.I., that's not normal. It never was. From the time he was a kid, the cameras were already there. Reality shows, interviews, public appearances, every move documented, every mistake amplified, every emotion turned into content. Most people, they mess up in private. They learn quietly, grow slowly, figure themselves out without the world watching. But King Harris, he grew up in front of millions. And that kind of pressure, it changes you. Because on one side, you're carrying a legacy. A father who didn't just succeed, but dominated an era of hip-hop. Built an empire, faced prison, came back stronger, turned his story into something people respect. That's not easy to live up to. But on the other side, you're still young, still figuring things out, still trying to find your own identity. And somewhere between those two realities, expectation and individuality, things started to shift. Because instead of headlines about growth, success, or music, King Harris's name kept appearing for something else. Controversy. Moments that made people pause and say, "Wait, what just happened?" And when you start looking at the timeline, it tells a story that's hard to ignore. Early run-ins, traffic stops, situations that could have been brushed off as small mistakes. But each one got bigger, louder, more public. And what stood out wasn't just what happened. It was how he responded. Because instead of stepping back, he leaned in, spoke on it, pushed back, sometimes even joked about it. And that kind of energy, it gets attention, but not always the kind you want. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, there was someone watching all of this very differently. T.I., not just as a celebrity, but as someone who's lived through it. He stood in courtrooms, sat in cells, faced consequences most people only hear about. And for years, he's been clear about one thing. He doesn't want his son walking that same path. You could hear it in his interviews, see it in how he spoke about discipline, responsibility, choices. This wasn't just advice. This was experience. Hard-earned, painful, real. But here's the reality no one likes to admit. Advice only works if it's taken. And over time, it started to feel like those warnings weren't landing. Because the pattern didn't stop. Moment after moment, headline after headline, each one adding more pressure. Not just on King, but on the entire family. Because when your name carries that much weight, one person's actions don't stay isolated. They ripple. And that's why his latest arrest hit differently. Because this didn't feel like just another incident. This felt like a breaking point. A collision of everything. The past, the pressure, the expectations, and the reality. And then came the image that made it impossible to ignore. King Harris, being taken into custody, wearing a full Pikachu onesie. It was surreal, almost unbelievable. The kind of image that doesn't just go viral. It sticks, because it wasn't just about what happened. It was about what it represented. A moment where everything serious collided with something that looked almost unreal. And for a lot of people, that's when it stopped being funny. Because behind that image was a story that suddenly felt a lot more serious than anyone expected. It was real. And within hours, that image was everywhere. Memes, clips, reactions. The internet did what it always does. It turned the moment into a spectacle. But behind all the jokes, behind the edits, behind the viral posts, something else was happening. Something serious. Because this time, the situation wasn't light. This wasn't something you could laugh off and forget the next day. And that's when the footage surfaced. Clips of T.I. arriving at the detention center. Walking in. Serious, focused, different. People immediately started slowing the videos down, frame by frame, studying every detail like it meant something, because it did. Every step, every expression, every pause. And what they saw didn't look like a routine visit. It looked heavy, like a man carrying more than just concern, like someone who already understood exactly what was at stake. And that's why this moment hit different. Because for the first time, people weren't just looking at King Harris as a headline. They were seeing the bigger picture. A father, a son, and a cycle that might be repeating itself. And suddenly, this wasn't just viral anymore. It was personal, emotional, real. But here's where everything intensifies. Because what happened inside that facility? That's where the story changes. According to people who claim to know more than what's public. That conversation wasn't calm. It wasn't soft. And it definitely wasn't simple. Something happened in that room. Something that, if true, could shift everything moving forward. Because the moment T.I. stepped inside, everything changed. Not for the cameras, not for the internet, but for King Harris. Because up until that point, this entire situation had been treated like content. Something to laugh at, something to repost, something to debate. But the second that door closed, it stopped being entertainment. It became real life. And according to those descriptions of the moment, the energy shifted instantly. No smiles, no casual greeting. No, it's going to be okay. Just silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. The kind that says everything without a single word. Because this wasn't just a father checking on his son. This was a man who had already lived this exact story, walking in to see it happening again. And the look on his face, people say it said everything. Not anger, not at first. Disappointment, the kind that hits harder than shouting ever could. Now imagine being in that room. You've just gone viral for all the wrong reasons. Your name is everywhere. Your image is being laughed at across the internet. And now your father, the one who's been warning you for years, is standing right in front of you. That pressure alone, it's enough to break anyone. But according to what's being said, that silence didn't last. Because eventually, T.I. spoke. And when he did, everything shifted. The tone sharpened. Not chaotic, not out of control. Controlled frustration. The kind that builds over time. The kind that comes from someone who's tried again and again to prevent this exact moment. And there's one line people keep coming back to. Allegedly, he said something along the lines of, "I already lived this life, why are you trying to repeat it?" Now, whether that's the exact wording or not, the message is what hit. Because this wasn't just about one arrest. This was about the pattern, the build-up, the warning signs that had been there all along. And for the first time, it felt like those warnings had become reality. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because according to those same accounts, King Harris didn't just sit there quietly. He responded. And not the way people expected. Because instead of backing down, instead of apologizing right away, he pushed back. Not aggressively, but defensively. Explaining himself. Justifying what happened. Trying to make it seem like things weren't as serious as they looked. And that's where everything changed. Because now, this wasn't just a father talking to his son. This was two completely different mindsets colliding. On one side, experience, consequences, reality. On the other, confidence, defiance, and the belief that things aren't as bad as they seem. And when those two worlds meet, it gets complicated. Because from T.I.'s perspective, this wasn't just a mistake. This was the beginning of something dangerous. But from King's perspective, this was just another situation being blown out of proportion. And that gap, that disconnect, is what made this moment so powerful. Because it revealed something deeper than headlines. Something real. A divide that can't be fixed with a quick conversation. Now, according to some breakdowns of the footage, at one point T.I. stepped closer, lowered his voice, changed his tone, less public, less intense, more personal, like he wasn't talking about the situation anymore. He was talking about the future. And whatever he said in that moment, people believe it landed. Because for a brief second, everything shifted again. King Harris went quiet. No interruptions. No explanations. No pushback. Just silence. And sometimes, that silence says more than anything else. Because maybe, just maybe, that was the moment it finally hit. Not the arrest. Not the memes. Not the internet. But the reality of where this path could lead. And if that's true, then what happened in that room might end up being more important than everything that happened outside of it. For a moment, there was no pushback, no arguing, no defending, no trying to explain it away. King Harris just sat there and listened. And that silence, that's what caught everyone's attention. Because for the first time, it looked like everything was actually sinking in. Not the memes, not the headlines, not the internet noise, the reality of it. But just as quickly as that moment settled in, it shifted again, because the tension didn't disappear. It evolved, and that's when the first major twist hit. Because while this emotional confrontation was unfolding behind closed doors, the footage was already leaking. Not the full conversation, not the full story, just fragments, clips, angles, partial moments. But in today's world, you don't need the full picture. You just need enough to create a narrative. And the second those clips hit the internet, everything exploded again. Because now people weren't just reacting to the arrest. They were reacting to the relationship, breaking it down, picking sides, asking questions like, was T.I. too harsh? Is King Harris refusing to listen? Is this a father trying to save his son, or slowly losing control? And just like that, the story got bigger, more emotional, more complicated, because it wasn't just about what happened outside anymore. It was about what happened inside that room. But then came a twist nobody expected. Because while everyone was focused on the confrontation, another detail started spreading. And this one changed the tone completely. Because reports began suggesting this wasn't just a heated moment. It might have been a wake-up call, a turning point, the kind of moment where everything comes down to one decision: change or keep going down the same path. And that possibility, it shifted everything. Because now this isn't just viral drama. This is a crossroads, a moment that could define what happens next. But here's the real question. Did it actually matter? Did that conversation change anything? Or was it just another moment in a cycle that keeps repeating? Because if what happened next is any indication, we might already have the answer. And what came next took this entire story to another level. The second that detention footage leaked, everything went into overdrive. Not gradually, instantly. Clips of T.I. walking into that facility, his face serious, his energy heavy, started flooding timelines everywhere. TikTok edits, zoomed-in screenshots, slow-motion breakdowns of every single movement. Within hours, a private father-son moment had turned into a global spectacle. But here's where it gets even more intense. The footage didn't show everything. It only showed pieces, fragments, moments taken out of context. And you already know what happens when the internet gets partial information. It fills in the blanks. Vast. Suddenly, people weren't just watching the clips. They were rewriting the story. Some said T.I. looked furious. Others said he looked heartbroken. A few claimed his body language showed something deeper. Frustration mixed with fear. And then came the speculation. Anonymous accounts, insiders, unverified claims spreading like facts. Posts saying, You didn't hear what he really said in that room. He went off on him. This is worse than people think. None of it confirmed. All of it spreading. And the more it spread, the more believable it felt. Because the footage itself, it was already powerful. A father standing there, a son sitting inside, a story that felt like it was repeating itself. That image alone hit harder than the arrest ever did. But then, another layer dropped. A longer version of the clip surfaced. Still not the full conversation, but more than before. And in that extended footage, something stood out. Something subtle, but impossible to ignore. T.I. wasn't just talking. He was pausing, stopping mid-sentence, looking away, like he was choosing his words carefully, or holding something back. And that hesitation, that's what changed everything. Because now it didn't look like anger. It looked like emotion, real emotion. Because this isn't just any situation. This is a man who has lived through the worst-case scenario, standing in front of his son, watching it unfold all over again. And for a moment, it stopped feeling like celebrity drama. It felt human. But just as people started leaning toward sympathy, the internet flipped again, because now they started comparing. On one side, a father clearly weighed down by everything happening. On the other, King Harris, at least publicly, acting like none of it really shook him. Posting, joking, moving like it wasn't serious. And that contrast didn't sit well with people. Comments started flooding in. He doesn't even realize how serious this is. His dad is trying to save him, and he's laughing. This is bigger than clout. This is real life. And just like that, public opinion shifted again. But then came the detail nobody saw coming. Because buried under all the speculation, all the clips, all the noise, a new idea started gaining traction. And this one felt different. Because according to what was being whispered, that conversation inside the detention center wasn't just emotional. It was decisive. Some sources claim that T.I. didn't just confront his son. He gave him a choice. A real one. Not about the moment. Not about the arrest. But about his future. And if that's true, then everything changes. Because that means what happened in that room wasn't just another conversation. It was a line being drawn. And what happens next depends entirely on which side of that line gets chosen. The internet is divided. But real life doesn't care about sides. Because while people are arguing in comment sections, while clips are still circulating, while opinions keep stacking up, something much more serious is happening behind the scenes. Consequences. Real ones. Not the kind you can laugh off. Not the kind you can turn into a meme. Not the kind that disappears when the trend dies. And that's where the story shifts again. Because up until now, everything has felt like a spectacle. A viral moment. A public embarrassment. A father-son confrontation turned into content. But this next phase, this is where it stops being entertainment and starts becoming reality. Because if what's being suggested is even partially true, then what happened inside that room between T.I. and King Harris wasn't just emotional. It was decisive. A line was drawn. Not publicly, not for the cameras, but privately. And lines like that, they come with weight. Change direction or deal with what comes next. That's the message people believe was delivered. Again, nothing officially confirmed. But the idea alone, it hit hard. Because suddenly, this wasn't just disappointment. This was a boundary. And if that's true, then that moment inside the detention center wasn't just another conversation. It was a turning point. But here's where everything gets more complicated. Because right after that idea started circulating, the industry started speaking. Not directly, not loudly, but clearly. Subtle posts, cryptic messages, statements with no names but perfect timing. One read, sometimes the loudest lesson is silence. Another, fame doesn't protect you from consequences, it exposes you to them. And people noticed, because those weren't random thoughts. They felt intentional, like people who understood the situation were sending a message without saying it outright. And just like that, the narrative evolved again. From a viral arrest, to a family moment, to something that felt like a warning. But then came the question that changed everything. What happens next? Does King Harris actually change? Does this moment finally land? Or does the pattern continue? Because if you look at the timeline, this isn't the first incident. And that's what makes this moment different. It's not just about what happened. It's about what keeps happening, and whether that cycle finally breaks or repeats. Because here's the truth most people don't want to say out loud. The internet will move on. The memes will fade. The clips will stop trending. The headlines will get replaced. But consequences, they don't go anywhere. They stay. Legal consequences, personal consequences, reputation, and those things don't reset with a new post. So now everything is hanging in the balance. Not just image, not just perception, but future, family, direction, and the scariest part, we still don't know which way this is going to go. Because moments like this, they don't define you immediately. They reveal you over time. And sometimes the biggest twist in a story doesn't come from what we just saw. It comes from what happens next. And right now, that next move is everything. Because by the time the footage fully spread, the internet didn't just react. It erupted. Not just trending, not just viral. This became one of those moments where everybody had something to say. Clips of T.I. walking into that facility, serious, focused, heavy, were replayed over and over again. People weren't just watching anymore. They were analyzing, frame by frame, expression by expression. And within hours, two completely different sides formed. On one side, supporters, people saying, "He's young, let him learn. Everyone makes mistakes at 21. This is being blown out of proportion." Some even argued that the footage of T.I. was being misread. That people were projecting emotions that weren't actually there. To them, this was simple. A father showing up, being present, handling things privately like it should be. But on the other side, there was no sympathy. And they were louder, more direct, more unforgiving. This isn't new. This is a pattern. How many times does it take? They weren't just criticizing the moment. They were questioning everything. Decisions, mindset, future. And then, people started digging. Old clips resurfaced. Past incidents got pulled back into the spotlight. Moments that once seemed minor now looked like part of a bigger story. A timeline, a pattern, and the louder that narrative got, the harder it became to ignore. But then the conversation shifted again, because people started comparing. On one side, T.I., a man who went through the system, faced consequences and rebuilt his life. On the other, King Harris, a young man now standing at a similar crossroads. In that contrast, it hit differently, because now this wasn't just about one incident. This was about legacy, about cycles, about whether history is repeating itself or about to be rewritten. And just when it felt like the conversation couldn't get any deeper, another layer appeared. Pressure. Some people started asking, is this too much? Growing up in the spotlight, being constantly compared, having every mistake amplified. Is that part of the problem? Is the pressure itself pushing things in the wrong direction? But others pushed back hard, saying, plenty of people grow up famous and don't end up here. And just like that, the divide got even wider. Meanwhile, T.I. stayed silent. No interviews, no statements, no attempt to control the narrative. And that silence, it made everything louder, because the longer it continued, the more it felt like something serious was happening behind the scenes. People started asking, is he handling this privately? Is there more we don't know? Is this bigger than what we're seeing? And those questions, they kept the story alive. But here's the part that matters most. While the internet debates, while opinions clash, while narratives form and collapse, the real situation is still unfolding. Because beyond all of this, there are consequences that don't care about public opinion. Legal, personal, long-term, and those, they're still coming. The internet is divided. The industry is watching. The family is silent. And the pressure, it's higher than it's ever been. But the biggest question still hasn't been answered. What happens next? Because if this really was a turning point, then the next move changes everything. And if it was, then this is just another chapter in a story that's nowhere near finished. And here's the part people aren't ready for. The final twist isn't loud. It isn't viral. It isn't coming from memes, clips, or trending hashtags. It's happening quietly behind the scenes. Because while the world is focused on reactions, on T.I.'s silence and King Harris's public image, there are real conversations taking place. Serious ones, legal discussions, family decisions, private talks about what comes next. And according to what's being whispered, this isn't being treated like just another incident. This is being treated like a breaking point. Because for the first time, this situation has crossed a line. Not just embarrassing, not just viral, but real. The kind of real where consequences don't wait. And when things reach that level, options get limited. You either change direction, or the situation forces you to. Now here's where things take another turn. Because while all of that is happening quietly, something else happened publicly, and it caught everyone off guard. Instead of stepping back, instead of going silent, instead of letting everything cool down, King Harris came back online, posting again, moving like nothing had changed, acting like the situation wasn't as serious as people were making it out to be. And that reaction, it shocked people. Because after everything, the arrest, the viral footage, the emotional visit from his father, people expected something different. Reflection, silence, maybe even accountability. But instead, it felt like the same pattern continuing. And that's when the narrative shifted Ain. Because now the question wasn't just, what happened? It became, what does this mean? Is this confidence or denial? Is this control or a lack of awareness? And the more people asked those questions, the less clear everything became. But then something else stood out. Something subtle, but powerful. T.I. stayed silent. No response. No defense. No public explanation. And that silence, it didn't feel random. It felt intentional. Like something was being handled privately. Like decisions were being made behind closed doors. And when things go quiet like that, it usually means one thing. Something serious is happening. But here's the twist nobody can ignore. While the internet is reacting, while people are debating, while clips keep circulating, time is still moving forward. And the next step, that's what defines everything. Because this isn't just about one moment anymore. It's about a pattern, a direction, a path that's either about to change or continue. And if it continues, then this situation could escalate into something far more serious than anyone expected. Because history has already shown what happens when warning signs get ignored. And right now, all the signs are there. Pressure, attention, consequences, all building at the same time. That's what makes this moment so critical. Because this isn't just a viral story anymore. It's a crossroads, a point where everything can shift in either direction. But the truth is, we still don't know which way it's going to go. Because moments like this don't end with one decision. They lead to another, and another, and another. So while the internet thinks it's already seen everything, while people think they understand the full picture, the reality is, we might just be watching the beginning. Because if the next move doesn't change anything, then this story is far from over. And the next update, that might be the one that changes everything. So now the real question is, what did we actually just witness? Was that footage just a father showing up for his son during a difficult moment? Or was it something deeper? A warning, a breaking point, a moment where everything finally caught up. Because let's be honest, some people are saying King Harris just made a mistake. He's young, still figuring things out, and the internet is blowing this out of proportion. But others, they're not buying that anymore. They're saying this isn't new. This isn't random. This is a pattern. And that footage of T.I. walking in, that wasn't just concern. That was pressure. Real pressure. The kind that doesn't come from headlines, but from knowing exactly where this road leads. So now it comes down to you. What do you think? Was T.I. right to handle it this way? Or should he have done something different? Do you think King Harris actually changes after this moment? Or is this just another chapter? And most importantly, is this situation about to calm down? Or are we heading towards something even bigger? Because one thing is clear. This story isn't finished. Not even close. There are still details we haven't seen. Still conversations happening behind the scenes. And if even part of what's being said is true, then what comes next is going to be even more intense than what we just witnessed. So stay locked in, because when the next piece drops, you're going to want to see it first.